Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're really going deep exploring Altimmune,
Uh-huh.
a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company
Yeah,
that's developing, these really interesting peptide-based therapies.
right.
But we're going to be homing in
Okay.
specifically on their lead candidate, Pemvidutide.
Interesting.
And this one, it holds a lot of promise for tackling two major health concerns,
Okay.
obesity and then liver disease,
Yeah.
you might know as MSH.
Mayas.
It's also called metabolic dysfunction-associated steatohepatitis.
Right, I've heard of that one.
So, it's a mouthful to say, but a very serious condition.
For sure.
So, what makes Altimmune's approach with pemvidutide so unique? I
Yeah.
mean, they're not just, copying existing therapies.
No, they're really pushing the boundaries here.
Yeah.
They're using a dual mechanism of action,
Right.
targeting both GLP-1 and glucagon receptors.
Now, for those of us who maybe aren't as familiar with these terms, could you break down why this dual action is so important?
Absolutely. So GLP-1 and glucagon, those are hormones naturally produced in the body,
Right.
and they're really essential for regulating a few key things.
Like what?
Your appetite, your metabolism,
Okay.
and even your liver function.
Wow.
So by mimicking the actions of both these hormones,
Okay.
pemvidutide tackles both weight loss and liver fat reduction at the same time.
Interesting.
This is kind of a big deal because it sets it apart from other therapies on the market right now.
How so?
Well, a lot of those other therapies really only focus on one of those aspects.
So this is kind of hitting two birds with one stone.
Exactly.
I remember reading about their phase 2 momentum trial for obesity, and the results were pretty impressive.
Oh, yeah. Those are some exciting findings.
Can you remind us what some of those findings were?
Absolutely. So in the momentum trial, participants who got the highest dose of pemvidutide,
Okay.
they achieved weight loss of up to 15.6% over 48 weeks.
Wow, 15.6%. That's significant.
Oh, it is. And there's another important detail here.
That's
A big chunk of that weight loss, it came from fat reduction, not muscle loss.
Oh, that's a crucial distinction.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about the number on the scale, it's about what kind of weight they're losing.
Exactly. It's about overall health.
Now, I know there's another trial underway, the IMPACT trial, right?
Yeah.
And that one's specifically looking at pemvidutide's effects on MH, that liver disease we talked about.
Right. And the IMPACT trial is showing some really promising results early on.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, they're seeing some really remarkable reductions in liver fat content in patients with MSH.
Really?
Some individuals are actually achieving normalization of their liver fat after just 12 weeks of treatment.
That's incredible.
It is. And the full results from this trial are expected in 2025.
Okay.
So we could be looking at some potentially game-changing data.
Yeah, it definitely seems like pemvidutide is entering a space with massive market potential.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you give us a sense of just how big the obesity and MSH markets are and how pemvidutide might fit in?
Well, the global market for anti-obesity medications, it's already huge, valued at over $30 billion.
Wow.
And it's projected to explode to $70 billion by 2031.
70 billion. That's a massive market.
It is, and the MASH therapy market isn't too far behind. Estimations put it exceeding $9.5 billion by the end of the decade.
So with markets growing that quickly, I'm guessing there's some pretty stiff competition out there.
Oh, for sure. It's a very competitive space.
Can you tell us about some of the key players in these markets?
Of course. So in the obesity market, we've got some established therapies like semaglutide, marketed as Wegovy,
Right.
and then there's tirzepatide.
Yeah.
Both of those are GLP-1 receptor agonists.
Okay.
Now, they are effective for weight loss and diabetes,
Sure.
but they don't have that dual mechanism that pemvidutide has.
Right, that direct targeting of liver fat reduction.
Exactly. And that's really where pemvidutide has the potential to carve out its own unique position.
Especially for patients with MAH.
Yeah.
So while those existing treatments, they work well for weight loss and diabetes,
Yeah.
they're not offering those liver-specific benefits that we see with pemvidutide.
Right.
So let's talk about Altimmune's financial standing as they're working to bring pemvidutide to market.
Okay.
Given this potential market and the competition, how are they doing?
Well, they ended 2024 with a good amount of cash and investments, $131.9 million to be exact.
Okay.
But their current burn rate, it's estimated to be around $23 to $25 million per quarter.
Oh, wow.
So they'll likely need to get more funding in the next 12 to 18 months,
I see.
just to keep things running and to support those all-important phase 3 trials for pemvidutide.
And those phase 3 trials, those are really the key to getting approval and ultimately getting pemvidutide out to patients.
They are.
So can you walk us through where those trials stand right now and what Altimmune's plans are for moving forward?
Sure. So they've already had their end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA for obesity,
Okay.
and they've gotten the go-ahead to proceed with their phase 3 program, which is a huge step forward.
That's a really positive sign.
It is.
So what does this phase 3 program for obesity actually look like?
Well, they've named it Velocity, very fitting,
Okay.
and it's going to include 4 pivotal trials, Velocity 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Wow, 4 trials.
Yeah, involving approximately 5,000 participants.
That's a lot of people.
It is.
And how long will these trials last?
It'll be over a 60-week treatment period.
Okay, so it's a pretty extensive program.
Yeah, it is.
So when are they expecting to start these velocity trials?
Right now, the projection is for them to begin in late 2025 or early 2026.
Got it.
And we can't forget about the phase 2b Impaxate trial for Imashic.
Yes, right.
Those results are still expected in the second quarter of 2025.
So a lot of important data points are coming up in the near future.
Oh, yeah.
And that kind of raises the question of financial risks, especially for investors who are following this closely.
Right.
So can you shed some light on what those risks might be?
Well, the need for additional funding, it raises the possibility of dilution for current shareholders.
Okay, so existing shares could be impacted?
Potentially.
What about the risk of bankruptcy? Is that something investors should be concerned about?
Well, Altimmune currently doesn't have any debt, which does help lower the immediate risk of bankruptcy.
Right.
However, their reported probability of bankruptcy, it's a bit higher than the industry average. It sits somewhere between 44% to 46%.
So there is a degree of risk involved.
Yeah, but that's not unusual for companies at this stage of development.
That's true.
It seems like a lot really hinges on the success of Pemvidutide.
Uh-huh.
If it performs well, those concerns about dilution and bankruptcy, they could fade away.
Okay, that makes sense.
It'll be interesting to see how things progress.
Definitely.
The next few years are going to be crucial for Altimmune. Welcome back to our deep dive on Altimmune.
Now, we touched on some really promising early data.
Yeah.
But it's the upcoming phase 3 trials that are really going to put pemvidutide through its paces.
You got it.
So what are the key endpoints they'll be focusing on in these trials?
So for the obesity trials, those are Velocity 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay.
The main thing they're looking at is the percentage change in body weight
Makes
from the start of the trial to week 60.
Okay, that's pretty standard for weight loss medications, right?
Exactly. It's the go-to metric.
Now, what about the IMPACT trial, the one that's evaluating pemvidutide for MS?
Right. So the InType trial, that's currently in phase 2b,
Okay.
and it has a bit of a more complex primary endpoint.
Interesting. What is it?
They're looking at the proportion of patients who achieve at least a 30% reduction in liver fat content.
Okay.
And that's measured by MRI-PDFF.
At week 48.
Exactly.
Now, MRI-PDFF, that sounds a little technical.
It is a bit of a mouthful.
Could you break that down for our listeners?
Sure. So MRI-PDFF,
Yeah.
it stands for Magnetic Resonance Imaging Proton Density Fat Fraction.
Okay.
Basically, it's a really specialized imaging technique that allows researchers to actually quantify...
To measure?
Yes, to measure how much fat is in the liver.
Okay.
It gives them a super precise and objective way to see how well Pemvidutide is working at reducing that liver fat.
So it's very targeted and sensitive.
Exactly.
Now, even with a promising therapy and well-designed trials,
Yeah.
there are always challenges in drug development.
Always.
What are some of the key hurdles that you think Altimmune might face as they move Pemvidutide through these later stage trials?
So one of the biggest challenges is just the sheer size of these trials.
I can imagine.
Enrolling and managing thousands of patients.
Wow.
Across multiple trial sites.
Yeah.
It's a massive logistical undertaking.
It's a huge operation.
It is, and it requires meticulous coordination and a ton of expertise.
Right, to make sure that the trials run smoothly and that the data they're getting is reliable.
Exactly. You need to be able to trust the data.
So it's like running a marathon, but with logistics.
That's a good way to put it.
And then, of course, there's patient compliance.
Oh, yeah, that's always a factor.
These trials require a lot from participants.
They do.
They need to stick to the treatment regimen for a long time.
We're talking weekly injections, dietary changes, exercise recommendations.
Yeah, it's not easy.
And maintaining that level of commitment for 60 weeks, that can be tough.
It's a big ask.
It is, and any deviations from the protocol, those can really impact the study results.
I see. So that's a constant concern.
It is.
And then, you can never rule out the possibility of unforeseen side effects.
That's true.
especially when you're moving to a larger trial population.
Right, you're working with more people. There's always that chance.
And even though pemvidutide has shown a good safety profile in earlier trials,
Yeah, it's been encouraging so far.
it's essential to stay vigilant.
Absolutely, especially as the trials progress and you start including a more diverse group of participants.
Yeah, you have to be really careful.
For sure.
So while the potential rewards of pemvidutide's success are huge,
Oh, they are.
the path to approval, it's not exactly a walk in the park.
Nope. It's definitely a journey.
So let's say pemvidutide does navigate these challenges successfully,
Okay.
gets that regulatory approval. What kind of impact are we looking at on the market?
Well, if it's approved, pemvidutide could really shake things up.
How so?
It's got that unique dual mechanism of action,
Right.
addressing both weight loss and liver health at the same time.
Yeah, it's hitting both of those key areas.
And that gives it a real edge over those existing GLP-1 receptor agonists.
You think it could attract a wider range of patients?
I do, because it's not just about weight loss or diabetes management anymore.
Right, it's tackling multiple issues.
Especially patients with MEH, they would benefit so much from a therapy that goes right at that liver fat reduction.
Makes sense.
And then there's the fact that it preserves lean muscle mass.
Right, we talked about that,
That could be a huge draw for people who are worried about muscle loss.
especially with some of the other weight loss medications out there.
Exactly. They might see this as a safer alternative.
So you really see it carving out a significant niche in the obesity and MASH markets.
I do. I think it has the potential to be a real game changer.
And they've got a competitive pricing strategy too.
That's right.
So they're thinking about accessibility.
Absolutely. They want to make sure it's available to a wider range of people.
But we can't ignore the competition.
Oh, for sure.
We've got big players like Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly.
Yeah, they're the heavy hitters.
They've got the resources, the experience.
They've got it all.
How can Altimmune compete with giants like that?
Well, they've been very strategic. They've built a team with deep expertise.
In what areas?
Commercialization, late-stage drug development.
Okay,
They've got the know-how,
makes sense.
and they've been proactive with regulatory agencies.
That's smart.
And that's already paid off.
How so?
Pemvidutide got fast-track designation for the treatment of MSH.
That's huge, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
I mean, that could potentially really speed up the approval process.
Absolutely. We could be talking months shaved off the review timeline.
Wow. And in a competitive market like this?
Time is everything.
Absolutely.
Getting to market faster can make all the difference.
So it sounds like, despite the competition, Altimmune is in a good position.
I think so.
They're ready to tackle these challenges.
They're prepared.
And, you know, when you think about it, the potential impact of a successful therapy like Pemvidutide,
Yeah.
it goes way beyond just the company itself.
It does.
There are big implications for public health,
Absolutely.
for the biopharmaceutical industry as a whole.
It could have a ripple effect.
So let's talk about those broader implications. What are we looking at here?
So obesity and metabolic liver diseases, these are major global health concerns.
Absolutely.
They carry significant costs, both socially and economically.
Right. They impact so many aspects of life.
And they're linked to so many other health issues.
Heart disease, diabetes, certain types of cancer,
It's a whole cascade of problems.
and existing treatment options, they don't always cut it.
No, they have their limitations.
So there's a real need for something new.
A big unmet need.
And if Pemvidutide is as effective as the early data suggests,
It could be a game changer.
it could really make a difference for millions of people.
Worldwide, potentially.
So it's not just about numbers, it's about lives.
It's about giving people hope.
Yeah, hope for a healthier future.
Absolutely.
And what about from a biopharmaceutical perspective?
Okay.
How could the success of Pemvidutide impact the industry?
I think it could fuel even more innovation
In what way?
in the field of metabolic therapies.
So we could see even more effective treatments
Potentially. And more targeted treatment.
for a wider range of metabolic disorders.
Well, exactly.
So it could be a real shift in how we approach these conditions.
It could be a paradigm shift.
It's exciting to think about.
It is. It's like moving beyond just managing symptoms
Yeah.
to actually targeting the root causes.
And potentially preventing them altogether.
That's the ultimate goal.
It's a powerful vision,
It is.
and one that Pemvidutide could help us achieve.
I think so.
Of course, it's going to take a lot more than just one drug.
Oh, yeah. It's going to require a multifaceted approach.
Right, we need to address individual behaviors.
And the systemic factors that contribute to these epidemics.
It's a complex issue.
It is, but Pemvidutide could be a crucial piece of the puzzle.
I agree.
It could open up new possibilities for prevention, for early intervention.
For better future for people who are struggling with metabolic diseases.
Absolutely.
It's inspiring to think about the positive impact it could have,
It is.
both on individual lives and on public health as a whole.
It's exciting.
Now, let's shift gears for a moment.
Okay.
Back to the financial side of things.
Okay.
We talked about the possibility of dilution,
Yeah.
the risk of bankruptcy.
Uh-huh.
But is there another scenario that we should be considering?
What do you have in mind?
Something with potentially positive financial implications.
Are you thinking about a strategic acquisition?
I am. It's always a possibility in this industry.
It is. Big companies are always on the lookout
For what?
for promising drug candidates,
Mm-hmm.
new technologies.
Then they want to add them to their portfolio.
Exactly. And a company like Altimmune,
Yeah.
they have a strong pipeline,
Right.
expertise in peptide-based therapies.
They've got that intranasal vaccine platform, too.
They do. They're a very attractive target for a larger company.
They have a lot to offer.
They do.
And if Pemvidutide keeps showing positive results in clinical trials,
Uh-huh.
it could spark a bidding war.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Big pharma companies wanting to get their hands on this valuable asset.
It's a hot commodity.
And that would probably lead to a significant premium on the stock price.
Most likely.
A big win for Altimmune and its investors.
It would be a major return on investment.
But an acquisition, it's not always a smooth road.
That's true.
There are risks involved.
There are.
So what kind of risks are we talking about here?
Well, sometimes after an acquisition, promising drugs, they can get lost in the shuffle.
Lost in the shuffle of a bigger organization.
Exactly.
The acquiring company, they might have different priorities.
Or they might not fully grasp the potential of the acquired asset.
So the development, the commercialization of a drug like Pemvidutide,
Yeah.
it could be delayed.
Or even shelved completely.
So it's a bit of a gamble,
It is. There's potential for big rewards.
but also a lot of uncertainty.
You said it.
So it's a decision that Altimmune's management team would have to think about very carefully,
Absolutely.
weighing the pros and cons.
For the company, for its employees, for its investors.
And most importantly, for the patients who could benefit from Pemvidutide.
the patients always come first.
It's fascinating to think about all the possibilities.
It is.
They're at a really pivotal point.
They are.
The decisions they make now, they'll have big consequences down the road.
They will. The next few years will be very telling.
We'll definitely be watching closely.
We will. We'll keep analyzing their progress and providing updates.
So stay tuned for part 3.
We'll dive into some of the ethical considerations around weight loss medications.
And we'll explore the potential impact of Pemvidutide on patient access and affordability.
It's going to be an interesting conversation.
So welcome back to our deep dive into Altimmune and their potentially game-changing therapy, Pemvidutide. We've explored its science, its potential impact on the market, and the competitive landscape it's stepping into. But now it's time to shift gears a bit and explore a crucial dimension that goes beyond data and projections, the ethical considerations.
Right. And societal implications, particularly for a therapy focused on obesity and weight loss like Pemvidutide.
Exactly. We've seen how effective existing GLP-1 receptor agonists can be for weight loss, but they've also sparked conversations about potential downsides. Things like the possibility of rebound weight gain if treatment is stopped, and then those longer-term effects that are still being studied.
For sure, and those concerns are valid and need to be addressed and examined carefully. But it's also important to remember that Pemvidutide, even though it's showing promise for weight loss, isn't just about aesthetics. It's not simply a vanity drug.
Right, it's got that dual mechanism of action.
Exactly. It directly targets liver health, making it a potential treatment for a serious medical condition, MAH. And if MAH is left unaddressed, it can have serious consequences.
That's a great point. MAH, or metabolic dysfunction-associated steatohepatitis, is often linked to obesity, but it's its own distinct condition. And it can progress to really advanced liver disease. So having a therapy that directly tackles that liver fat accumulation, that could be a huge breakthrough.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another critical consideration: patient access and affordability. If Pemvidutide gets approved, will it be accessible to everyone who needs it, regardless of their socioeconomic status? We've seen with other innovative therapies that those high development costs often lead to high prices for patients.
Right, and that creates barriers.
Exactly. It prevents people from getting the treatment they need.
And I know Altimmune has said that their pricing strategy for Pemvidutide will be competitive. But, as we've discussed, competitive in a market that already has expensive drugs, it doesn't necessarily guarantee affordability for everyone.
You're absolutely right. That's something that will need to be monitored closely. And potentially, there might be a need for advocating for fair pricing and access to make sure this potentially life-changing therapy reaches everyone who needs it, not just those who can afford it.
Absolutely. It highlights the fact that developing these groundbreaking therapies is just one part of the equation. Ensuring equitable access is just as crucial.
I completely agree. And looking beyond these immediate concerns of access and affordability, we also have to consider that bigger picture. How could pemvidutide impact the overall metabolic health landscape?
It's exciting to think about the possibilities. If pemvidutide lives up to its potential, it could represent a paradigm shift in how we approach metabolic disorders as a whole.
Absolutely. Imagine a future where we're not just managing symptoms, but actually targeting the underlying mechanisms driving these conditions.
It would definitely require a multifaceted approach, though, addressing not just individual behaviors, but also those systemic factors that are contributing to the rise of obesity and metabolic diseases.
You're exactly right. It's not a simple solution. But pemvidutide could be a critical piece of that puzzle, opening up new avenues for prevention, early intervention, and ultimately better metabolic health outcomes for everyone.
It's certainly a hopeful note to end on. So as we wrap up our deep dive, what is the one key takeaway you would want to leave our listeners with today?
I think it's that pemvidutide represents more than just a new drug. It's a catalyst for change. It challenges us to rethink how we view obesity, how we approach metabolic liver disease, and the complex interplay between individual health and societal well-being. The next few years will be really interesting to watch as this story unfolds. I believe it has huge potential to transform the way we think about and manage metabolic health.
It definitely does. And thank you all for joining us on this journey of discovery today. We hope this deep dive has given you valuable insights into the science, the market dynamics, and the broader implications of pemvidutide. Remember, knowledge is power, and we encourage you to keep exploring this topic and engage in thoughtful discussions about the future of metabolic health.